We got 7 different stories from 7 different news outlets, guys. It's time for another episode of Regan's Newsround. Let's go. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. This is REGANELITE here with another episode of Regan's Newsround, where we look at 7 different articles from 7 different news outlets going on in the United Kingdom. And we start with the Guardian here with the headline that Starmer says 2.5 billion renewable jobs funds will help the North Sea oil workers. The Labour leader aims to set up British job bonus funds to challenge oil firms to accelerate shifts to clean energy. So obviously, when it comes to the workers, obviously they will want assurances that their jobs are going to be secure. They want to make sure that they are, if they're not earning the same pay, if not more, have the same terms and conditions, if not more or less, or whatsoever. If they transition into renewable energies, they want to make sure that their jobs are secure. Now, whether the workers themselves are for or against renewable energies is another matter, of course. But one thing they will want to be assured of is job security if once we make that transition. Because one thing that wasn't done in the past when it came to the collapse of the coal mining, the coal mining industry, obviously, was that thousands of workers were left, thousands of workers who worked in that industry, kind of just left out in the rut. And as we make this transition from fossil and oil fuels to more renewable energies, because we do need to go that way, and we need to go that way a hell of a lot sooner than what we're doing now. We want to make sure that we try and protect those within work. Those who have a bit of a more senior age, I would say, you probably want to try and pay them off if possible, so that they can have a nice, healthy pension package or whatnot. But those in the middle age and a bit younger, maybe, who are just still starting in the industry, you want to make sure that they have jobs secured for themselves and for the future. So I think that's really important to take into perspective. So I do I do like the fact that Labour are looking at this and thinking about the workers in all this aspect of renewable energy as well, which I think is very important. So Sir Keir Starmer has challenged the oil industry to dramatically speed up its shift to clean energy by offering up to 2.5 billion to subsidise new jobs in renewables for North Sea workers. The Labour leader has told executives from firms including Shell and BP that the UK is in a global race to move away from oil and gas, with competitive countries such as the US investing billions in climate-friendly technology. Starmer and Ed Miliband, the Shadow Climate Secretary, hosted a roundtable with executives from 20 energy firms in Aberdeen on Thursday during a 2-day visit to promote the party's plans to decarbonise the UK's energy supplies by 2030, a target date the oil industry is vigorously resisting. Most European nations are doing 2035, I believe, and we're trying to, and I believe the current Conservative government, they want to do it to the 2035 as well, in line, but Labour want to keep the 2030 target. Starmer will announce that if Labour wins the next general election, it will set up a 2.5 billion British job bonus fund to prioritise investment in those clean energy technologies in regions that are heavily dependent on North Sea oil, including around Aberdeen and the northeast of England. The technologies would be carbon capture to support industries that still need oil and gas to pipe up their waste CO2 into depleted North Sea oil fields, building afloat wind farms for deep water sites, and in green hydrogen, a zero carbon fuel needed for energy intensive industries such as steelmaking, railway and chemicals production. We need to. Steel industry is really much under threat, I feel, especially with the one in Scunthorpe. You know, we're throwing taxpayer money at it. I'd rather just put it in the hands of the state at this point, but whether Labour will do that, I don't think they would, but I'm kind of tired of the government constantly throwing money at it, if I'm honest. Green hydrogen, zero carbon fuel, you know, these all good things, but obviously, as long as Labour has a constructive plan of how to do that, I'm all for it. Starmer argues that Rishi Sunak's recent decision to max out the North Sea oil and gas productions and deprioritise green energy and technology investments is a strategic failure driven by the belief that it will increase the Conservatives' short-term electoral support, particularly in the northeast of Scotland. Do they even have any supporters in Scotland, the Conservative Party? Like, the vast majority obviously support the SNP. I think some support the Albert Party. There are still some who support Labour, but the vast majority are down for the Scottish National Party. And I just think I don't see Conservatives gaining ground in Scotland at this point. They haven't done much at all, if not anything, for people in Scotland in the last 13 years. I'm just going to put that out there. So I'm not really too worried from that perspective. This Conservative Party has zero ambition, zero plans, zero concern for the millions of British families suffering sky-high energy bills as a result of the government's abject failure, the Labour leader has said. Every day they play political games causing uncertainty and investment risks for the sector. They are costing jobs and hitting people's pockets. My Labour government will rise above the short-termist gimmicks, put the country before our party and deliver a long-term future for our energy industry. The oil industry lobbying group Offshore Energy UK, that's the OEUK, said it is committed to long-term transition to net zero, but has embraced Sunak's decision to license extraction from the Rosebank oil and gas fields, the North Sea's largest untapped field. Well, of course they're all for it, because they're going to make some nice money from it, aren't they? OEUK is pressing the government to support another 100 billion in new North Sea investment. Why do they need another 100 billion? They're rich enough. They should be putting their own hand in their own pocket instead of taxpayer. To replace the 180 fields it predicts will stop producing oil in the next decade. They predict that it will stop producing oil in the next decade. They don't know that for certain. They're just saying, can you just give us another 100 billion? Please. Because we told you to. And Sunak's going to go, yeah, I'll give it to you. Because that's what he will do. Climate scientists are adamant that doing so will sabotage global effects to prevent runaway climate heating. Allegedly, he might do it. Starmer is understood to have argued in the round table that while oil and gas will still play a role in the UK's energy supply, a partnership was required between industry, unions and government to shift quickly on net zero technologies. Yep, that's the way to do it. Industry, unions, governments, get them all round the table and to hash it out basically. Labour has promised a 2.5 billion job subsidy and other funding streams which support historic energy communities across the UK, including Grangemouth, a sprawling oil and petrochemical complex on the 5th of 4th. It also plans to invest in upgrading major ports around the UK, arguing that it is far wiser strategic investment than the free ports Sunak has vowed to create. Starmer's engagement with oil executives carry political risk, but also recognises the significance of persuading the industry to accept the case for rapid meeting the UK's net zero targets, both for the general election and meeting Labour's manifesto commitments. Sunak has made it clear he plans to frame Labour as an approach on the war on motorists. I don't think they're going to look at him like that, if I'm honest. And will accuse Starmer of destroying the valuable North Sea jobs. Labour's hope voters, union leaders and oil workers will accept the urgency of the climate argument, and that Starmer's strategy will help it outflank the Scottish National Party at the next election. Floating offshore wind farms will provide much cheaper clean energy, but there are substantial reservations about how significant a role carbon capture and mass-produced hydrogen can play in the clean energy transition. There's no doubt that it's a lot of good things. It sounds like a lot of good things from Labour. Whether they will do that and commit to that is another matter, I think, is the question. I mean, it does sound really good, but I'm just thinking here, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe they're still going to go. The Rosebank is going to go ahead under Labour anyway, because once the project starts, it's going to be probably impossible for them to stop it. So I imagine that it's still going to go ahead, but it's just quite frustrating that it's going to cost us taxpayer money. But in terms of obviously the job prospect, I think that's really, really important that they look after the jobs, the job market in terms on there, and just protect the workers' rights when they make that transition. And he's looking obviously to flank the SNP in Scotland, which is something that the Conservatives are very scared to do. You don't see Conservatives up there in Scotland, do we? So I think that's important to emphasise as well. So we're going to go from that to Sky News, guys. And she's still talking. She is still talking, ladies and gentlemen. This one from Sky News. Suella Braverman has called for amendments to Illegal Migration Act in order to start the Rwanda flights before the election. The sacked Home Secretary has piled fresh pressure on Rishi Sunak to disapply human rights laws to revive the Rwanda scheme after the Supreme Court ruled against it. I'm going to say this now, guys. If you don't already know, The Supreme Court had nothing to do with the European Convention of Courts on Human Rights. Yeah, if you go and read the law itself, you can read the judgment ruling on yourself if you don't want to take my word for it. The other thing as well is that even if they ruled for it and they were able to get the flights up and deport people, it still does not change the fact that people are still going to come to the country and still going to come in boats. It's not going to stop people coming in boats. It's just not. Yeah, it's not going to happen. Like, if you really want to stop the boats, the very most logical thing is to set up an asylum seeker processing claim in Calais, in France, where they can go through the process on the other side of the country, on the other side of the UK, instead of them being piled up here in our hotels, in barges, in barracks, wherever they may be, and we, the taxpayer, are paying for them sitting there doing absolutely nothing. Yeah, but they don't want to tell you that. They don't want to tell you that they can solve it in an instant by doing that. And they want you to think that it's all the immigrants' faults, that everything that's going wrong in this country, which is nonsense, because we still have one of the lowest migration numbers in Europe in comparison to other nations as well. Yes, the numbers have increased, but there's still many European nations that are taking in more illegal migrations than we are. And that's just a fact. You can go and look at the numbers yourself, guys. We are not like the top, or I don't think we're even mid-table, if I'm honest, in Europe. Suella Braverman has called for changes for our own illegal migration act to revive the Rwanda deportation scheme, admitting there is no chance of stopping the boats within the current legal framework. The former Home Secretary has criticised the bill she introduced in Parliament in July in her latest intervention since being sacked earlier this week. In an opinion piece for the Daily Telegraph, Toryograph, she welcomed the Prime Minister's pledge to introduce emergency legislation for flights to take off after the Supreme Court has ruled this would be unlawful. However, said his plans to strike a new treaty with Rwanda to address the judge's concerns will not solve the fundamental issues, saying for this to happen, Parliament needs to amend the Illegal Migration Act. Suella Braverman has suggested 5 changes, including addressing the Supreme Court concerns by taking practical steps to improve Rwanda's asylum system and excluding all legal avenues of challenge so flights can take off before the next general election. Yeah, because what they're going to do. The thing is that a part of me just feels like this is just something that Rishi Sunak is just doing to appease to the. I think Rishi Sunak, if I'm honest, I just think he's just saying all this. I don't think he's serious about all this. This is just about keeping certain people in the party happy. I generally think that's what it is. I wonder if David Cameron was put on the spot. Do you support flights to Rwanda? Do you support flights to Rwanda? I wonder what his answer would be if he was pressed on it. He probably would try to dodge the question, most likely, because I don't think even he is for this scheme, if I'm honest. It's just so bonkers. Like, take away human rights for these people, but you're also at the same time going to be taking more rights away for us as well. It's important to stress that. She also opposes amending the Immigration Act so that arrivals are removed within days and not months. This is just rhetoric, guys. Rhetoric. Excluding legal challenges to detain people on arrival in order to avoid burdening the cost. Introducing emergency legislation by the Christmas recess and recalling Parliament to sit and debate it over the holiday period. It's a waste of time, waste of money, guys. Echoing calls from other Tory MPs, she wrote, the entirety of the Human Rights Act and European Convention on Human Rights, remember, the ECHR didn't have any bearing on the ruling, and other relevant international obligations or legislation, including the Refugee Convention, must be disapplied. She added, this can no longer any chance of stopping the boats within the current legal framework. Having committed to emergency legislation, the Prime Minister must now give parliamentarians a clear choice to either properly control illegal migration or explain to the British people why they are powerless under international law and must simply accept every greater number of illegal arrivals on these shores. The rhetoric is just so horrendous from her. It's just so disgusting. It really, really is. Mr. Sunak is under pressure to explain how he intends to circumvent human rights laws and international conventions following Supreme Court rulings. In its ruling, the UK highest court said that the Rwanda scheme was not lawful because there was a risk that people sent there could be deported to the countries they are fleeing from, a term known as refoulement. The judges said this fell foul not only of the European Convention on Human Rights, ECHR, but many Tory MPs want to leave, but also other international treaties and the UK's own domestic legislation. This is going to upset so many nations. Doing all this, guys, is going to destroy our reputation. As if our reputation as a nation has already been damaged. It's going to be damaged even further. Treaties that we've had will no longer can be deemed invalid as well, because we won't be deemed trustworthy. The Northern Ireland, the Good Friday Agreement will be under threat from all of this as well. The US will be vigorously angry with us as well, and any hopes of a US trade deal will be dead and buried as well. There's just too many potholes for Rishi Sunak to fill in order to get this going. It's not going to happen. There's just too much in the way yet for the government to do this. On Friday, Transport Secretary Mark Harper also said he was in the government's ambition to deliver flights to Rwanda in the spring. Weren't they supposed to do it by the end of the year? He said, however, Mr. Sunak said he was prepared to do what it takes to deliver the Rwanda plan, including a possible change international agreements. Asked if the UK could leave the European Court on Human Rights, he told Sky News, if it's necessary to change our international agreements, then we are prepared to do so. Sky News understands the new Conservative group, a coherent of predominantly Red Bull MPs on the right of the party, plan to write to the Prime Minister demanding the promise of new legislation be over-engineered so it seals potential further legal challenges. The group now will make three requests to stop this from happening, including that the new legislation disapplies the UK's Human Rights Act. They said it should also include notwithstanding clauses in the order to override any international treaties or laws that could block the plan. And they also want to give ministers powers to disregard the so-called pajama injunction, which are the last-minute orders from judges that could stop planes from taking off. The group of MPs want the legislation to be drawn up immediately so that it can be in place before the next general election. Mr. Sunak has staked his premiership on the promise to stop the boats with Rwanda plan, seen as essential to fulfilling that pledge. But with an election due by January 2025 at the latest, time is running out to pass new legislation, which could take months. Earlier, Chancellor Jeremy Hunt said he could not guarantee flights will go to Rwanda next year, apparently contradicting Mr. Sunak's position on Wednesday that the scheme will be up and running by spring, despite the Supreme Court's ruling. Yeah, we don't need to hear from the Chancellor on that, but the other thing as well, guys, you have to remember is that if they get this through and they get on that plane, and they land in Rwanda, they're not coming back. Like, they're not going to have their process claimed or anything like that. They're going to be, if they want to process, they can get processing claim in Rwanda. That's if they allow it, or Rwandans. But they're not going to be coming back to the UK. The idea is to deport them, and then they're no longer our problem. And we're throwing money at this, basically. Absolutely ridiculous amount of money is being thrown on this. It's just stupid rhetoric talk is what it is. And I generally hope that it's nothing more than talk, and it does not turn into into an actual reality, because if it does, it's going to be bad news, not just for people coming to the UK, but those who are already in the UK, and people like and ordinary people like myself, who have basic human rights, are going to be taken away from us. Sick pay, holiday pay, all the stuff that gives us our basic fundamental rights are going to be taken away, all through this scheme. And the thing is that most senior people who are pensioners and all that, who don't have any of this, they're not going to see this. So speaking of business, because we are floating towards business, guys. So this next one, guys, is from the BBC. The headline is retail sales have hit its lowest level since 2021 lockdowns. So this is obviously in tune with obviously the cost of living crisis, obviously the impact of Brexit, the war in Ukraine, the war in Gaza as well. So there's lots of factors into it. But obviously the cost of living crisis, and I would say it's probably the most hampering thing, more than anything, that's causing this. So shoppers bought less fuel and food in October as they were hit by rising costs, living costs and poor weather, according to official figures. The volume of products sold last month fell by 0.3% to its lowest level since February 2021, when large parts of the UK were in COVID lockdowns. Retail sales were widely been forecast to grow in October. The worse than expected data emerged as recent figures showed the UK economy was failing to grow. Gross domestic products, the amount of goods services produced by the UK, flatlined between July and September, and the Bank of England expected only subdued growth until 2025. Next week, the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt will make his autumn statement when he will set out the government's tax and spending plans and his strategy to grow the economy. By the way, economy stuff I'm not very good at, so I will cover some of it, but obviously I'm not an expert, guys, in any way, shape or form when it comes to numbers. Commenting on the latest data, the Office for National Statistics said petrol and diesel sales may have been affected by the increase in fuel prices. Demand for other goods was also lower, said the ONS. That's the Office for National Statistics. It was another poor month for household goods and clothes stores, with these retail reports that the cost of living pressures, reducing footfall and poor weather hit them hard, said Heather Borval, Deputy Director for Survey and Economic Indicators at the ONS. During the October storm, Babbitt hit much of the UK, resulting in exceptional rainfall, according to the Met Office. Fuel sales fell by 2% between September and October, with retailers reporting that consumers were spending their money more cautiously, alongside the impact of bad weather. Supermarkets said shoppers were buying more food, but specialist stores such as butchers and bakers recorded a decline. Sales of alcohol and tobacco also dropped, down 4.2% and 10.4% respectively. Retailers said shoppers were buying cheaper products and prioritising important items. Well, they would be, when they're in a cost of living crisis, especially for people in the middle and lower incomes. They, of course, the middle and lower incomes, they'll be looking at more on their bills, and they'll obviously be prioritising, obviously, the run up to Christmas. I wonder how Christmas sales will do compared to last year. I'm curious to see how the numbers will be. I don't know if it's been more or less the last successive years. Let me know in the comments if you know. The retail sector is heading into the most important trading period, which includes Christmas. Lisa Hooker, the leader of the industry for consumer markets at PwC, said, "We know from earlier in the year that in tough times, consumer priority special events and family occasions, so retailers will be hoping that consumers are keeping their powder dry for last-minute Christmas spending surge come December." Compared to last October, retail sales volumes were 2.7% lower. The ONS also revised down its reading of retail sales in September to a drop of 1.1% after initially estimating a decline of 0.9%. Recent figures show that inflation, which measures the rate at which prices are rising, fell sharply to 4.6% in the year to October from 6.7%. It follows a long succession of interest rates by the Bank of England. While rising rates can reduce inflation, it also affects economic growth by making it more expensive for consumers and businesses to borrow money. Alan Pritchard, head of retail and consumer goods at Lloyds Bank, said another dip in sales, suggesting rising household costs remain at the forefront of consumers' minds, despite headlining inflation easing in recent months. The rising cost of living remains a drag on consumers' discretionary incomes. Households continue to prioritise essential spending, particularly as falling winter temperatures push energy use up. So some interesting numbers there, obviously hitting their lowest levels, the retail numbers there, which is obviously not good. But obviously they didn't obviously state the factors. Obviously they did state in there the factor might have been the weather as well. There was a lot of rain last month, that is for sure. We definitely had a lot of rain, a lot of cold, so that would have played a factor into it too. But I'd be curious, obviously, how this month does, and December, obviously. I think, obviously, Black Friday, that will be playing a factor as well in terms of people looking for cheap bargain deals, anything like that. People will try to, obviously, spend at that time. People will try to take the cheap. Most people with middle and lower incomes, especially, will try to look for cheap deals for Christmas presents. That is for sure, guys. So just before we go to the next article, guys, we're just going to take a short little break here because there happens to be some broken news.
Welcome to Broken News. A number of top British journalists say it's completely unfair to expect them to report truthfully on major political stories when they're such great mates with the people who are in power. The group of client journalists has been called as much use as a clotted cream dildo in an orgy. Our reporter has more.
A free press reporting without fear or favour. Holding our elected leaders to account is key to a functional democracy. But one group of political reporters says it's simply too much to expect them to do that when they're good pals with, married to, or being finger blasted by those in high office. One senior correspondent told Broken News, "I became a journalist because I wanted to report the unvarnished truth. But it's much harder to do that once you've quaffed Bolly with Rishi in Mayfair or attended the GQ Man of the Year Awards with Govey and done gack in the bogs with him." When Broken News put it to one client journalist that they were simply copying and pasting messages from a WhatsApp group without checking facts or getting a second source, they said, "Same old Labour, flip-flopping while the PM delivers on the people's priorities. Just copy and paste that, Rob and Laura. See you at Claridge's on Friday. Obviously don't paste that bit, or this bit, or that bit." The issue was brought into sharp focus during the COVID inquiry, when details emerged of scandalous behaviours at the heart of government that literally everyone knew about at the time, but some reporters didn't report on at the time because they said they couldn't possibly have known about it at the time, even though everyone was screaming at them at the time to report on it at the time. When the full sordid details were made available to the public recently, these same reporters said they were totally surprised, shocked and blindsided, which Broken News understands to be absolute bollocks. Back to you.
Daddy, thank you. Well, Broken News has just been sent an open letter to client journalists on behalf of the people of Great Britain. It says, "Do your fucking job or fuck off."
Ah, it's just cut off. Oh dear, what's going on? Oh, it's just cut off right there, guys. I'm sorry, I don't know what's happened. It might be the case I might be having internet trouble, potentially. I hope not. It was up to date anyway, to be fair. But yeah, I'll put the link in the description. I'm sure this won't be the last time you hear it, guys. But I'll see if I can... I don't know, should I play it again at the end of the news round? I could do. I'll think about it, guys. I'll think about it. Let's move on, guys, because we've not got all day. I'm sure you guys have got plenty of things to do as well. So what else is happening, guys? Well, this one's an interesting one. This is an exclusive from iNews. So nurses warn Starmer strikes will continue under a Labour government if pay demands aren't met. Former Labour Health Secretary Alan Milburn said it was unacceptable for doctors to go on strike. Well, what are they supposed to do, Alan, if they can't afford to pay their bills? What are they supposed to do? Please, comments down below. What is the alternative if they can't even get round the table with them? I mean, like... I am just hoping that they are realistic about what pay and conditions and what are expected of them. A part of me feels like that when they do get round the table with a Labour government as opposed to a Conservative government, because it just looks like that they're not going to give anything the workers want. I'm just hoping that that both Labour and the workers are given a realistic opportunity, realistic terms of what they can and can't get. And I hope they are fair. I just hope Labour are fair. That's what I'm kind of hoping for out of all this, to be, if I'm honest, guys. So, nurses leaders have warned Keir Starmer that there will be more strikes under a future Labour government unless it sorts out pay and understaffing. Pariga Marquis, England director of the Royal Courses of Nursing, the RCN, has told iNews that Labour Labour for Power podcast Yeah, so the iNews has a podcast called Labour's Plan for Power, guys. Wherever you get your podcast from, if you want to check that out, yeah, you can always check that from there as well. That its members will not shy away from further industrial action in a bid to secure improvements for both of them and their patients. It comes as the former Labour Health Secretary Alan Milburn attacked the decision of senior doctors to go on strike, branding the move as unacceptable as he insisted that Labour cannot shrink from difficult battles. The RCN carried out a sustained period of industrial action in attempts to secure better pay and working conditions for their members, with emergency staging the first walkout in their 100-year history for the first time last year. Miss Marquis said it was unlikely the profession would wait so long to carry out further action. It did not rule out striking should Labour come into power after the next election. I think it is a change that is no going back from, she said. It took us 106 years in England to get to that point, and our members voting to take strike action. But I don't think we're going to be going back for another 106 years and not contemplating that again. Nursing pay is not at a level anywhere near the level it needs to be to really make it an attractive profession. So he continued, adding, whichever party they need to listen to nurses. I don't think we can say that our members wouldn't go out on strike under a Labour government, not by any stretch of the imagination. The government offered a 5% increase in pay as a lump sum cash for NHS workers. It's crap, by the way. That's crap pay, by the way. Which was accepted by the NHS Staff Council but rejected by the RCM. However, the union failed to secure enough votes to continue industrial action. But Miss Marquis' warned members will decide as a collective the times at which we will take action. And I don't think that that's going to particularly matter on who's in government, she added. The Shadow Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, said last year that the nurses' demands for a 19% increase was obviously unaffordable. So meet somewhere in the middle. So if at the time they were saying 19% and Conservatives are offering 5%, surely you can meet somewhere in the middle for them. That's the obvious thing to me. Mr. Streeting told the podcast that he wanted to be a voice for patients and was prepared to stand up to vested interests in the NHS. There's no shortage of professional bodies representing pretty much everyone in every part of the NHS. You've got the trade unions, you've got the Royal Colleges, you've got different layers of management voices from the NHS Confederation to the NHS providers. But where's the patient's voice in all this? It's so much weaker than the voices of the professions, he said. There's no doubt that, but they also need to be able to pay for a living as well. And sometimes those professions are exercising professional vested interests, which is ultimately their job representing staff. But it's my job to represent patients and patients' interests. And of course, staff often want the best thing for patients, but there are times where sensible reforms are met with opposition because it doesn't always work in favour of vested interests or the status quo. Mr. Milburn said there were challenges that both Sir Keir Starmer and his Shadow Health Secretary will have to manage if they win the election. Speaking to the Eyes podcast, he took particular aim at senior medics at the British Medical Association, the BMA, who have chosen to take industrial action at a time when the NHS is facing a major crisis. Sometimes you do end up, believe me, in fighting if you're the health secretary, Mr. Milburn said. You've got to be very clear about what the bottom line is. And look, I just think it is unacceptable that you have people going on strike in the National Health Service who are senior clinicians doing an important job and work for patients, and you've got to be clear about what is acceptable and what isn't acceptable behaviour. He does not understand the situation clearly, in my opinion. He added, and sometimes the BMA frankly don't do themselves any favours and don't do their neighbours any favours either. Again, he does not understand the situation. They have not had a pay rise for what is it, above more than 13 years? What is it, like 20 years or something since they've had a proper pay rise? A real terms pay rise? This is the thing, he does not understand this. But Dr. K.E. Bramall-Stainer of the BMA hit back. If someone has to be the boogeyman, and it has to be us, well, I can't sleep at night knowing that we're speaking the truth about the day-to-day pressures that our patients are experiencing. Pressures such as a toxic culture that is driving away dedicated doctors who invest many, many years of our lives and much resources into their career to look after their patients, and it doesn't feel safe. The Labour's Plan for Power, the NHS and Your Health is the second episode of an exclusive new podcast examined by the government, which Keir Starmer will actually do if it wins the next general election. Like I said, guys, if you want to check it out, wherever you get your podcast, the podcast is called Labour's Plan for Power podcast. So if you want to check that out, you're more than welcome to do so, guys. Excuse me while I just have a sip. Re-energise myself. So what do I think? What do I think of this? Should I be concerned? What should we be concerned? I do think we should be in part concerned, obviously, with the premise of more strikes could continue. But I honestly think that Labour will get round the table, which is the difference between them and the Conservatives, because the Conservatives are not willing to compromise at all on their side. Whereas I think Labour, although they have tight budget strings, they will be reasonable with their offers as well. But they do need to address the situations that are taking place. They need to be able to address the major concerns that these doctors and nurses are taking place. And I think Alan Milburn has been living under a rock over what's been happening in the last 13 years to the National Healthcare Service. And that's just my opinion, and you can disagree with me on that, but that's just kind of how it comes across to me. So the next one here, we're going to the Independent now. It's more of a bit of a Brexity one as well, to be fair, because this is a stark contrast to what we just read from Suella Braverman here. So the headline is, leaving the ECHR is off the table with Cameron as Foreign Secretary, George Osborne says. George Osborne suggested the nuclear option of withdrawing from the international treaty would be too extreme for Lord Cameron. That's interesting. I mean, obviously, it's not coming from David Cameron, but it's coming from George Osborne. And no doubt that George Osborne and David Cameron, Lord Cameron, he will be in the ear of David Cameron as well, because they actually had a very good relationship during their time as Chancellor and Prime Minister together. And he would not be saying something like that out open, I don't think, if it wasn't meant to give a hint, to the current Conservative government. But let's read what he actually says, to be clear. So David Cameron's former Chancellor says leaving the European Convention on Human Rights, the ECHR, is off the table, with the former Prime Minister serving as Foreign Secretary. George Osborne suggested the nuclear option of withdrawing from the international treaty would be too extreme for Lord Cameron, despite frustrations in government after the Supreme Court ruled its Rwanda scheme unlawful. The new Foreign Secretary flirted with the prospect of leaving the ECHR as Prime Minister in 2015, but never took steps to do so, opting to hold the Brexit referendum a year later, which effectively ended his pro-Remain administration. Mr. Osborne told his Political Currency podcast with Ed Balls, "The interesting thing about David Cameron's appointment, I don't think he necessarily will go along with something as extreme as that. He's actually more right-wing than I am on this, and he was a Home Office Special Advisor for Michael Howard. He's always rallied against elements of the ECHR's judgment, but I think the option of going into the general election saying we're going to pull out the ECHR and throw the challenge to Labour and see whether they agree or not, I think is basically how off the table it's basically now off the table, because David Cameron is Foreign Secretary. He thinks Cameron's not gonna do that. It's gonna be Cameron will have a lot of sway and influence. I mean, Cameron might just say privately to Sunak, you know what, just ignore that silly former Home Secretary. She doesn't matter. When Lord Cameron was asked in 2015 in the Commons whether the UK might pull out of the ECHR should it face obstacles in a bid to change Labour's era human rights laws, he said he would rule out absolutely nothing in getting that done. We are very clear about what we want, which is British judges making British decisions in courts, he added. The exact Home Secretary Suella Braverman is among those on the Tory right demanding that Mr Sunak introduces the laws to block off the ECHR, Human Rights Act and other legal routes, challenges the government's plan to deport asylum seekers to Kiwi. That's Rwanda. The Prime Minister resisting these calls on Wednesday, but did announce emergency legislation to empower Parliament to deem Rwanda a safe country and new measures aimed at mitigating the risk of migrants being returned to their home country in the East African nation. And there's nothing more to that really, guys. But obviously the European Convention on Human Rights, it's interesting from George Osborne saying that it's kind of that he's basically outright saying it's off the table. But if Lord Cameron doesn't rule it out, it does make George Osborne look a little bit stupid, It will make George Osborne look a little bit stupid. But I don't trust him or Ed Balls and what they say on their podcast. That's why I don't listen to it, guys. I would take more attention to detail on what Rory Stewart and Alistair Campbell would say on the Rest is Politics podcast. Although I can understand why people don't always take them seriously because of their history as well, and rightfully so. But yeah, I would just say, like I say with any sorts of information, take it with a pinch of salt. And this is another pinch of salt thing. So it is a difficult situation to say the least on that. So we're just coming up to 40 minutes, guys. We've got 2 more articles to go through, guys. I'll just make sure I've got the right feed on. Just before I go to the next one, guys, if you can hit the like button, be greatly appreciated. And if you can share this across social media, hit the bell notification icon so you'll be notified of when I upload another video. And if you want to financially support me, you can just buy me by buying me a coffee or joining my Patreon. The links are in the description down below. Any of that stuff is greatly appreciated. And by the way, if you do join my Patreon, you get access to exclusive content as well. So the next one here, we're going to Open Democracy here. And it's actually an exclusive from them. This is to do with rent arrears. So soaring renter population is in key Tory seats could shape the election. So what's this about? So new research finds the tally of Tory seats where more than a fifth of people are private tenants have tripled in a decade. So a lot of people have benefited by the rent arrears under the Conservatives, and it may play a factor into this, and it looks like it's going to play a factor potentially at the general election. So before I talk more about it, let's read into this exclusive a little bit more. So renters will have more of a say in key Tory seats at the next general election, according to new research that shows that the number of private tenants booming across suburban areas and satellite towns. Exclusive analysis shared with Open Democracy showed there are likely 77 Tory constituencies where private renters now make up for a fifth of the population, up from 25 in 2011. The calculation is complicit by changing electoral boundaries in some seats, but researchers use ward-level data to estimate how the new seats would have voted if they existed in 2019. In 2021, 22% of Tory constituencies in England had a fifth or more renters, according to census data. This had risen to 40% in the 2021 survey. While private renters have traditionally been concentrated in urban areas, spiraling rental costs and lockdown have pushed tenants further out of cities. The Tory seat with the biggest increase in private renting was Hendon in outer London, up from 26% in 2011 to 36% in 2021. Another outer London seat was Uxbridge and South Ruislip. That's the former Boris Johnson one, that was. A key Tory marginal previously held by Boris Johnson had seen the percentage of renters increase from 18% to 24% over the decade. The Tories have held Uxbridge and South Ruislip in this year's by-election by just 495 votes. Yeah, we know about that. Overall analysis from tenant groups Generation Rent found that 194 constituencies in England have populations of 20% or more with private renters, up from 114 in 2011. The total number of private renters across England and Wales has grown from 3.8 million in 2010 to 2011 to 4.6 million in 2021-2022, according to the England Housing Survey. As this happens, the power of renters in elections is growing, particularly in the seats that have not historically represented the concerns of tenants. So that's a massive jump in the last 10 years. And obviously with the lack of houses being built, which has led to obviously people not being able to afford homes, the cost of living of buying a home is almost near to next impossible for people, especially people like myself at my age, making it extremely difficult. So people turn to rent. But the thing is now with the cost of living crisis making the bills being as high as they are, rent arrears, most landlords obviously just want to make big profit off the rent arrears that they do. People need homes. People don't want to be living with their parents or grandparents or whatever forever. They want to be having their own home, their own independence, and they're not getting that as of right now, which is not good. which is why we need more homes, more homes. However, Generation Rent also found that private renters are more than twice as likely not to be registered as the population as a whole. In the 2019 election, 1.22 million people were not registered to vote anywhere, with 45% of these being private renters. Dan Wilson-Crew, Deputy Chief Executive of Generation Rent, said it was getting harder for politicians to ignore renters. The renter population continues to grow in the 2010s, but because many of us have been pushed out of the city's constituencies by high rents and the need for family homes, renters' political power has grown even more and could make a difference in many more seats at future elections. But this new political influence is limited if we aren't registered to vote in the first place, and it's too easy to fall off the register after a stressful house move. We've made mapping the private rented sector to inform our campaign to make sure renters have a political vote, and we hope this work helps others who are working to widen democratic participation. So they're interesting numbers to say the least. 26% in 2011 there for Hendon, just for one of them, but 22% of Tory constituencies in England had a fifth or more renters. It is some interesting numbers to say the least, but like I said in there, guys, it just costs way too much at the moment. So I'll say about how many years now am I going to say when I was last renting? I'll say about in the original, my first rent or accommodation, we're talking about 9 years ago, I think it was now. My first proper rent or accommodation, I was paying £850 per calendar month, and this is not even central London. And this was the cheapest rent in the area I was rented in as well. And the area that I was rented in is actually quite a rich area. It's not a poor area. It's quite an actual rich area. Because there's quite a lot of people with a lot of wealth around where I was originally renting with my partner. So that was £850 per month. We were very fortunate that our landlords only raised the rent once, and I think it was once by £25, and that was after 4 years. Until the 5th year, then we had to move. But they were very good landlords. They looked after us well, and we were very fortunate. But then when we moved to another place for a couple of years before we end up in the situation where we are now, I was paying literally, I think, an extra £250 for similar to what we already had, and I was just perplexing myself, like, why am I paying an extra £250 for essentially the same thing I've already got? I was struggling to save rent, save money at that time. I was still able to save money, but I couldn't save any money at that time. And then once we moved out, once we moved out of rent again, we were able to save up money back again. But the thing is that people should be able to live, be able to make a decent living, and be able to save money for future, for holidays, luxuries, whatever, as well as being able to live a fairly decent life. And people can't do that right now. People can't even afford to make ends meet. People can't afford lunch. Some kids can't even afford to have basic foods. Parents are giving up. Some people are working 60 plus hours a week, not even getting any time off, just to pay the bills. And it's an absolute criminality is what it is, and it should not have to be that way in any way, shape or form. And it's heartbreaking. It really is heartbreaking out there for people right now. It really is. I'm very fortunate in the situation that I am in right now, but for others it's not. And I just hope that Labour really have a plan to deal with this. Well, obviously they do have a plan, but I hope it's good enough for people. I think it's the best way to put it, guys, because we need to make sure that everybody is given the best opportunities in life, and I think that's the right way to say it. So the last one we got for you guys is not so much an article. It's more of an analysis or a written piece here Byline Times, guys, as I've always said, yeah, you know, Byline Times. I should also say with Open Democracy as well, because Open Democracy, both of them, if you can support either one of those guys, please do. Both Open Democracy and Byline Times do some wonderful work, but Byline Times obviously has really come of age. And if you're in the United Kingdom and you happen to go across a newsstand, you might just see a paper of Byline Times. Pick up a copy. It would be greatly appreciated, and they would really love to see you reading their paper. So what is the story from Byline Times? So the headline is "The Right-Wing Blind Spot Over Free Speech." So what? You're thinking? So a new report by the Institute of Economic Affairs think tank describes the emergence of the culture-controlled left conveniently looking the other way when it comes to the right of politics. This is going to be fascinating, to say the least, guys. I'm very fascinated to hear what they're going to say. Now, before I read into this, I've said this before and I've said this again. Remember, yeah, this is really important. Even this applies even including my channel. Whatever you read online, whatever you see online, always take things with a pinch of salt. Doesn't matter how reliable the news source is. Nothing is certain. The one thing is certain is what you see with your real eyes, what you hear with your ears, and what you smell with your nose. Those are real. Those are the real things. They're more real than whatever you're seeing on that screen or mobile device or whatever it is you happen to be watching this through. Take what you see and what you hear with a pinch of salt. Important caveat. Always like to remind you guys that. So, the Evening Standard over Avin Lebedev used a speech in the House of Lords this week to praise the UK government's great tradition of free speech and warned against it being given up so easily. He talks about free speech. Baron Lebedev of Hampton in the London borough of Richmond-on-Thames and of Siberia in the Russian Federation told his peers in the upper chamber that he was alarmed with the pace of which the erosion of free speech that is taking place here. The Russian businessman who co-owns the independent newspaper has sat in the House of Lords as a crossbench life peer since November 2020 after being nominated by the then Prime Minister Boris Johnson for philanthropy and services to the media. By the way, I just want to point out that the Independent, I do use the Independent, but I would certainly rather use that than the Telegraph or the Daily Mail or the Express. Daily Mail is not reliable anyway, but the Express and the Telegraph require subscriptions, so I'm not going to pay into them unless you guys want to pay them into me. So if you want me to cover articles from the Telegraph, Financial Times or something, you can always buy me a coffee and I will use that money to pay for subscriptions for them so I can give you articles from them directly from this channel if you want that. It was a move that drew much criticism, with Byline Times being one of the few media outlets to report extensively on Lebedev's relationship with Johnson. As recently as last month, it was revealed that Johnson held two unmitigated meetings with Lebedev at the height of the build-up to the first coronavirus lockdown, according to the COVID inquiry's hearings. Lebedev's evidence that free speech is under attack, highlighted by author J.K. Rowling's views on gender, are probably the views of the quiet majority, before describing his shock that Coutts Bank decided that Nigel Farage was no longer suitable to be a customer. Well, he's suitable to be a customer now because he made he made a ton of money going into the jungle from I'm a Celebrity, so he can go into Coutts. We can all shut up and stop talking about it now, can't we? A 2021 investigation by Byline Times revealed how some on the right are using gender-critical arguments to further their anti-LGBTIQ agenda, while Farage's serious political persecutions earlier this year appeared to be based on what they were, at the very least, highly questionable claims. In an attempt to head off the assertion from any of his peers that might be considered a reactionary or a conservative, Lebedev said he equally supports the rights of Jeremy Corbyn to air his views on Hamas. He eventually raised some concerns about the provision of the Online Safety Act that he felt that could give further legal basis for a process of censorship and self-censorship that is already underway, Lebedev said. This this is not just the left that is guilty of cancel culture. Culture-controlled left. The idea that its left is corroding democratic freedoms by policing language use is something of the Institute of Economic Affairs, the IEA think tank, made the point of a recent report that took aim, of what it describes as the emergence of the council-controlled left. The IDA has been widely credited for driving the force behind trustonomics, the thinking that underpinned Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng's disastrous mini-budget last year. Under this ideology, which you can read there if you want to, why it believes it is impossible to reduce the inequality because characteristics such as race, gender and class that cause disparities are fixed. In the IDA's latest 56-page paper, Dictating Was the Culture-Controlled Left and the War Against Free Speech, the word protests can be found just 6 times. In fact, there is no mention of all of legislation passed by this government, such as Police, Crime, Sentencing and Courts Act 2022 or the Lobbying Act of 2014. It is a significant omission as many right groups have raised concerns on the impact of these laws on the rights to protest, and at the same time as having gagging effects on anyone that might criticise government policy. The IEA asserts that its approximately £120,000 non-crime hate instances entered on police databases are an example of the left's weaponising of concepts such as hate speech and harm to push legislation that silences their political opponents. Being accused of hate speech is the contemporary equivalence of being charged with the blasphemy or seditious liberal, the author of the report states. The paper also argues that hate speech laws are enforced in a political parallel and inconsistent manner. From Mark Glenning, the head of cultural affairs at the IEA and the reported author, censorship of some views based on the alleged harm is incompatible with liberal democracy. Britain's liberal political culture faces a greater threat than it has encountered since our country emerged as a representative democracy in the early 20th century. This is a result of the emergence of a culture-controlled left ideology that sees state regulation of language as the principal way to enforce greater social equality. This necessity involves violating the speech of rights of individuals who wish to express views considered transgressive. Defenders of political pluralism now need to wage a counterattack based upon a foundational natural rights-based defence of free speech. The solution, the paper concludes, is to restate the case for each individual inherent right to think and peacefully express themselves. I don't like any of this, and I don't like where this is going, guys. Blatant hypocrisy. It would appear then that the right of an individual to express themselves does not extend to concern about what one campaigning group told the Byline Times are authoritarian anti-protest laws. Morg Livingston, co-author of Charged. I don't know what's wrong with me today. I've been coughing. I don't feel like it's a cold or anything. I've been coughing a lot lately. I do apologise, guys. Let me start that again. Morg Livingston, the co-author of Charged, How the Police Tried to Suppress Protests, said, "There is a blatant hypocrisy of those who apparently promote the right of hate speech as free speech, whilst remaining silent about a government that is limiting our ability to protest at all." That's exactly a great point. I'll read that again. There is a blatant hypocrisy of those who apparently promote the right of hate speech as free speech, whilst remaining silent about a government that is limiting our ability to protest at all. One rule for them, another rule for the rest of us. Under the Police Act 2022, the police have been provided vast discretionary powers to reduce noisy protests that cause serious disruption and limit the length of protests. We may be left with a quiet, short protest, but that doesn't annoy anyone. Nor that's not protest, but obstreperiousness. See, stuff like this is something I could never see happen in France, but you just never know. In response to the IEA's latest paper, Green peer Natalie Bergen said the threats to democratic free speech and expression of views are many, but none of them are covered in this paper. Charities are left fearful of speaking up for the purpose that they serve by the Lobbying Act, which have been labelled the gagging law, she added. Representative trade union laws kept under Labour have been brought in by the Tories to prevent freedom of expression for workers. And under this government, we've seen multiple acts deliberately targeting peaceful protests, the monitoring of social media accounts such as the Department of Education and teaching assistants and librarians, and special advisors monitoring freedom of information requests from journalists. So those who are getting freedom of information requests, they're under scrutiny as well. Indigo Rumbelow, founder of Just Stop Oil, asked, "Where are these free speech warriors when I was arrested at my home for giving a speech about the climate crisis? Where were the free speech warriors when our government brought in a sweep of authoritarian anti-protest laws? They are only interested in inflaming division in our society in order to distract us from the utter failures of politics to find a route out of this mess," Rumbelow added. Compass director Neil Lawson told Byline Times he believes the right choice is to ignore the fact that the right to protest is a crucial component of free speech because protests threaten the establishment and vested interests they represent. Given inevitable protests as the efforts of climate change kick in and the inequality gap widens, the right wants to clamp down now, he added. This builds a pressure cooker of frustration. There's no outlet for the people's discount. Neither democracy nor protests let them be heard. This is a great article. And this couldn't be more true. Saying that they are standing for free speech while also taking away our free speech, but trying to do it in a way that's not so obvious. And when you have certain medias portraying a picture, and I've said this before about how when you paint a picture to someone, about not always giving them the full picture, and if they believe what they see, they can end up being influenced to think something differently from the actual facts. You know, I think what is it? Robespierre Max put it quite rightly when he talked about Nigel Farage. He once said about Nigel Farage is that while Nigel Farage tells lies, he always adds a little bit of truth to what he says. So he always gives people truth, but then adds in the lies to make himself be believable. Because if you add a bit of truth to what you say, to everything that you are saying, even though some of what you are saying is lies, if you're adding truth to it, it then gets mixed into potentially truthfulness. The way we speak, the way we come across can decide how we choose to believe things as well. But this is about suppressing speech while also pretending to advocate for free speech, which they are not doing as well. Excuse me. Fascinating read, that is for sure, guys. And on that, guys, I just want to say a massive thank you to everyone who has watched Regan's Newsround. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below of any of the articles that we talked about today. What did you guys think of them all? I do apologise for coughing and burping or whatever I've been doing throughout the day for some reason. This is my third time of recording this. I've had to do it 3 times, guys, so I do apologise for that. Just before you guys go, just want to say, if you haven't already, please hit the like button. It'd be greatly appreciated. Share it across social media. Hit the bell notification icon so you'll be notified when I upload another video. And if you want to financially support me, you can do that by buying me a coffee or by supporting me on Patreon, where you get access to exclusive content on there. So thank you very much for watching. Take care, look after yourself, and I hope to catch you all very, very soon.